Welcome to Elements of Effective Instruction 2.0, Module 2 of our online Elements of Effective Instruction. My name is Sue Hall and I'm part of the Ed Services Staff Development Department. So I'm very excited to start out this part of the module regarding engaging students and monitoring student learning through rigorous and relevant learning opportunities. EOEI 2.0 is about strategies as well as the culture and expectations of the Murrieta Valley Unified School District. What better way to start this module than with mindset? Mindset in the Murrieta Valley Unified School District has been a movement for a couple of years now that we've really embraced as a way to support our students' learning. The plan for implementing a mindset culture in our district began with some books. The first one being the Mindset book and the second one being the Mindsets in the Classroom. Both of these books are available through Ed Services by simply emailing Erica Franklin and asking to check out one of these books. Now, many of your principals have actually gotten books for the entire staff and of both mindsets and mindsets in the classroom, and have done some work around reading them together, talking about them together over the last couple of years. Mindsets in the Classroom offers many practical ideas for things that you can do to help your students grow in this area of mindset and how it's connected to learning. We also have a haiku course. It's called Mindsets, and there are many resources in there, including the links to the websites PERTS, which is out of Stanford University, and Mindset Works, which is the work coming out of Dr. Carol Dweck's research, and she is the one who wrote the book Mindsets. Now, if you are not currently enrolled in the haiku course Mindsets, again, email Erica Franklin or myself, Sue Hall, to get yourself into that course. You'll need to do that during this module or pause the module to put that request in or check and see if you have that, because we are going to ask you to explore resources for credit for this module and we'd like you to get a chance to look in that haiku course. And then finally, Brainology is a pilot that was begun a couple of years ago by Warm Springs Middle School, and it's actually the curriculum that goes with Mindsets. It's got an online version as well as teacher lessons. Warm Springs has implemented a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade framework for teaching mindset to their students. So if you're really curious about what has been done in this area from a school-wide basis, certainly talk to somebody or the administration at Warm Springs Middle School. So high-level learners, the idea that all students can learn at high levels is a key component to the shifts that we've been making in education over the last number of years. And it's the idea that everyone can get there. And it really challenges us in the area of IQ with the discrepancy model, which basically has been the last 50 plus years of training in education and school psychology, that IQ is fixed, immutable, unchangeable. That has been unraveling due to the work around the neuroscience and the cognitive science as related to brains and learning. And it really has implications for us, because when we get that number of an IQ, we don't want to just leave students in that kind of fixed static frame of mind and our own thinking as teachers about what their abilities are, because what they've found with the malleability of the brain now through the brain scans and science is that there can be a 20 to 40 point difference for or against the fixed number based on learning. Learning can have that much of an impact on IQ and being in a learning environment. The traumatized brain actually on an IQ test would show a substandard IQ number potentially, and really not be a true representation of the learning that a student is able to do. So it does challenge us as educators in what the new brain science is bringing forth for us. And then finally, goal setting. In the Murrieta School District, we have been moving forward in our deepening of our understanding about how the motivation and the learning improves when we help students come up with ways to do their own goal setting. So what does that look like in our district? We have these goal setting sheets that we've started with our reading inventory, our phonics inventory, and our math inventory. Here's a sample of one at first grade. We have them for every grade level. And what you'll see that you can access through the universal screening course, also in haiku, that all teachers have been added to under the extras tab. Make note of that. You have to find it under the extras tab. This is a worksheet for students, and what you can do with this is students, when they take their reading inventory or their math inventory, they would record their scores everywhere here for a first grader from BR in the red all the way up to an above grade level reading for a first grader. And you will find one that's matched specifically to each grade level. And a core principle of universal screening is that you are universally screening 3 to 4 times a year. Now, what we've done with the growth mindset messaging is that we've added, please graph your successes this year and let's watch your progress and grow and have a growth mindset. And so we've added the goal setting here. My reading goal is quarter by quarter, and then some strategies to help make new connections in the brain and to improve the reading the student will. So this is taking just the idea of monitoring your own progress and moving it to goal setting and having some mindset messaging and growth messaging, linking how you do to your effort right on a goal setting sheet. You will see the same thing with a phonics inventory. Again, all the way up through 12th grade. If they have a phonics need, they're an EL student or a struggling reader, it does not necessarily mean that they've been on an IEP. It could be a gap in instruction. It could be they've moved around a lot, and they actually do need to have a phonics inventory. Again, you see the growth mindset messaging. And then math. Math is where we began in our school district, working with in the area of mindset. And it's also where Dr. Carol Dweck has really focused her mindset work is in the area of math. You'll note that Khan Academy, which began with tutorials in math, it's expanded now beyond that. They have incorporated growth mindset messaging in their adaptive software, as well as videos about the power of yet. Dr. Carol Dweck talks about the power of yet. We haven't learned something yet. And we've got those resources available to you. But this one is for the math, the quantile scores. Again, all students, all grade levels can be tracking their growth through quantile in math, whether it's the math inventory or the Think Through Math quantile math inventory at the secondary level. So as we move into exactly what growth mindset and fixed mindset we have some other things to highlight for you. First of all, we had a teacher who took a parent article about what growth mindset is and how a parent can help their own child, their own student, have a growth mindset and understand that sometimes struggle is part of the learning. As they began their IEP meetings with a parent article. That resource is available to you in that haiku course that I talked about that we do want you to explore as part of a journal activity that you'll complete at the end of this part of the module. As a matter of fact, I recommend you have a little note-taking tool nearby your computer as you're taking this course. Jot down a couple of your thoughts because you'll be asked to reflect a little bit on what you found as relates to mindset and how you might use it in the classroom. So Parent articles are a resource that are available to you, and I have found it to be incredibly well received by parents when they realize that the struggle that their child goes through is actually part of that learning process and how they work with their children around this idea. Parent nights. We've had schools in our district host parent nights around mindset and what it means. When I've attended those meetings, I have been quite interested to note that parents who really seem to grasp this notion quite easily are very freed up to understand their role and how they can support their student through perseverance, grit, and helping their child develop a growth mindset. And then finally, through our haiku course and things to bring to parents, has to do with the actual brain research that comes with the mindset messaging and understanding how the brain works and why we are where we are with our understanding of the brain and its effects on learning. So I'd like to switch now to highlight some information that comes from a presenter, Emily Deal of Mindset Works. And she's titled her presentation, Ignite Learning with a Growth Mindset. I highly recommend you go to the archive on the California Department of Education and hear her speak through her slides here as she can give an even more in-depth talk regarding some of the research. It's a fascinating, well worth it listening to Emily talk through the research. But we're going to go through it together here as well and highlight some things and hopefully really get you thinking about this idea of how you work with students around their mindsets and student achievement in your subject areas. As I mentioned earlier, it began with Dr. Carol Dweck out of Stanford University. And she's got decades of research behind what became a very popular book a couple of years ago called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And what separates her work is that it's really moved from just being in the psychology arena to the neuroscience arena and actually looking at and watching the brain and making that connection. This book is a great starting place. As you'll note, there are chapters that help you with your parenting, have a business connection, school, of course, and relationships, and offers a lot to think about how we look at learning the brain, grit, perseverance, and the mistakes that we make and the failures that we experience. So what is a fixed versus a growth mindset? Remember, we were challenging the idea of IQ being a fixed trait. Well, a fixed mindset takes the idea that intelligence, or for that matter, any ability, is a fixed trait. A growth mindset takes the view, based on brain research, that intelligence, or any ability, can be developed. So this is the idea that all students can learn at high levels. Now, I didn't say that they have ability at a high level. The idea of learning at a high level is that it can be developed, and how we think about that development is the key and makes all the difference. Let's look at a few concepts as it relates to the two mindsets. On the left, you'll see some scenarios and some traits that represent the fixed mindset, or intelligence is static. On the right, in the green, you will see some characteristics that represent the growth mindset, or the idea that intelligence can be developed. That's a proven fact at this point in time. That 20 to 40 IQ difference based on the exposure students have had to learning and the kind of learning that they go through, and the idea that the brain is malleable and you can grow the dendrites in your brain, that is where we are right now in our understanding of IQ and brain science. If you look in the middle, how do the two mindsets deal with challenges? So on the left, if you are desiring to look smart and have everybody think that you're smart, you might have a tendency to avoid challenges if you're of the fixed mindset. Conversely, the growth mindset leads to a desire to learn and therefore a tendency to embrace challenge because it's recognized as the way that you will grow your intelligence, that you will learn. Now, a caution here as before we move forward. The caution is not to look at a person as you are a fixed mindset person, you are a growth mindset person. Because if we really thought about this, we would all find ourselves in a category around some skill or learning or task that we actually might fluctuate between having a fixed and a growth mindset mentality. So think about that. We don't want to just put somebody in a box, but the research as we move forward will be very interesting to talk about, and how we can help our students move out of a fixed mindset when it comes to their subject matter, their abilities in school, whether it's visual performing arts, whether it's math or reading, any of the academic areas. So let's look at obstacles. With a fixed mindset, the idea is that you would give up easily. You come to an obstacle, intelligence is static, you can't do it, you give up easily. The growth mindset, you persist in the face of setbacks. The obstacle is just another thing to overcome on your path to learning. Effort. With a fixed mindset, thinking your intelligence is static, you're either smart or you're not smart, you see effort as fruitless, or even worse, just not worth your wasting time. However, with a growth mindset, you see effort as the path to mastery. Criticism. A fixed mindset, you might ignore useful negative feedback. You don't want to hear it, you're not going to entertain it. However, the growth mindset comes at a task learning from the criticism, being open to feedback. And finally, on our graph here, the two mindsets in terms of success of others. The fixed mindset comes at things feeling threatened by the success of others, almost as if success is a finite quality, that if somebody else is receiving success, it diminishes you in your success. But the growth mindset actually finds lessons and inspiration in the success of others and feels they can learn from the success of others. So as a result, the person with a fixed mindset around a subject area, around the idea of intelligence, around the idea of whether they can do well in school or not, the fixed intelligence, they might plateau early and achieve less than their full potential. Whether they're on the high end of achievement or the low end of achievement, you can have a fixed mindset. And this kind of confirms a deterministic view of the world, kind of a why try, this is all it's going to be for me, or this is who I am, so it's more deterministic. Conversely, the growth mindset, as a result, people with this kind of an idea and a mindset, they reach ever higher levels of achievement. That sense that they're never really done, and that idea that all this gives them a greater sense of free will. And I love that universal truth there, that we have a free will. Now, what does it look like for a student sitting in a classroom? This student might be thinking things like, I'm just not good at certain things, with a fixed mindset. Or, if I make mistakes, people will think I'm dumb. Or, if I get embarrassed, if I have to work hard, improperly linking the idea of hard work to not being smart. Or, I'm not going to raise my hand because I might make a mistake. So an adverse response to mistake making. Do you know students like this? Have you felt like this? Might you have students in your classroom that think like this? So as we help students work toward having a growth mindset, we want to help them begin to have the self-talk that looks more like this. I can learn new things if I work hard. Get help and don't give up. Or, I want to learn new things even if I'm not perfect at the beginning. Or, I worked hard for that. I'm proud of it. Or, bummer, that hurts. But what can I learn from this? That's the openness to learning from mistakes. So now might be a time to jot on that piece of paper or on your note-taking device about some of those mindsets that you might see in your students in school. Maybe what's springing up about something that really is a problem in your classroom. If you're a math teacher, you don't have to go far to hear the I hate math, because we've really struggled to help our students understand that the hard work and the practice and the effort that it takes to learn something new in math is part of the process of growing their brain. That's the key, the growing the brain part. And that's coming from neuroscience, the neuroscience of learning. This is a short video clip that when you go to the link on the California Department of Ed website, you will actually have access to this 2-minute video to show students about what happens to their brain when they learn. There will be a way for them to have it explained to them about their dendrites, the growth of their brain, and how learning impacts it. So I highly recommend you go and get this little piece and show your students. The research is really becoming clear that when students learn about how the brain is malleable and that they have some control and power over what happens in their brain, and that actually makes them smarter in the learning process, they do better. They have higher academic achievement. We're going to look a little at that research. So we've been helping students understand that they should be healthy, heart healthy and healthy so that they can do well in school. But have we linked it to the brain? The neuroscience is now becoming additionally very clear on the fact that healthy habits do make a specific difference in brain development. And that could be at any age. And we can impact our brain and the health of our brain and how we grow the dendrites in our brain for a lifetime of learning. And so this is a poster that you could teach students. You could have a little lesson around the Brainology program that Warm Springs uses. Talks about this, that the actual food that you eat makes a difference in your brain development and your learning. Leafy greens, eggs, nuts, fish, and drinking lots of water has an impact on the brain. Sleep, 9 to 10 hours every night, especially for students. Now I know that that might sound like a lot of sleep for us as adults, but the research is coming in around that 9-hour mark is really healthy for our brains. Getting our exercise. It's not just about fitness, it's about brain development. And then finally, using calming strategies when things agitate us, cause us to be overwhelmed. And that's part of mindfulness, which has a link in brain research about taking some time to use some of those strategies like square breathing that you'll see here. You see the open hand stance where you're relaxing yourself. And we have a very connected, a very knowledge and information loaded society now with high stress, even in the younger classrooms. Things that are going on at home, all of those things impact. And so teaching students how to do this has a direct effect on brain development. In Module 1 for EOEI 2.0, we talked about PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Strategies, and learning to self-regulate and calm is part of that, and it does impact the brain, which ultimately has an impact on student achievement. So specifically, why is a growth mindset the key to success as an educator? Dr. Carol Dweck is very clear that she sees this as the basis for helping educators help students reach the highest potential. The two mindsets, the idea that intelligence can grow, are the growth minded people, or you're born with it, are the fixed minded people. Again, no one is in a perfect box around every idea, but let's just talk about the idea that kids have of I'm smart or I'm not smart. We want to encourage them to embrace challenges, set challenging and attainable goals, see effort and practice as the path to mastery, keep going when things get tough, and learn a lot from others. We want to help them move away from a fixed mindset, which keeps them avoiding challenges, keeps them having no goals or ones that are so unrealistic that they're not attainable. The idea that thinking that talent is more important than practice. In other words, that person who's really great at math in the classroom or science or reading or a sport or art, that they were just born that way and that it's talent and that it doesn't really matter what you do, you just have it. If you talk to people that have risen to high levels in their chosen areas, you will find that they have put in many, many, many hours of practice. We want to move them away from the give up easily and often, the learned helplessness that so many of our students have if they don't get an instant answer. So we want to teach them about the brain so we can move them off of that. And then finally, that jealous of others or not able or not willing to accept any help, and seeing that as something that they don't want to do, but actually have them see that that helps grow their brain. Again, notice the connection to the brain and growing the brain. So here's some of the research that you can dive in a little bit deeper with Emily Deal on the California Department of Ed website, or you can go directly to some of the references here and look at the research yourself. But the impact on achievement was first begun with 7th graders on this study number 1 in 2007, and Dr. Dweck worked on this. And it was about the theories of intelligence and the ability to predict achievement in adolescence. It was a longitudinal study. It included an intervention. But where it began was students took a test where they rated what they thought about various sayings, which put them in a category of either a fixed or growth mindset when it had to do with intelligence. These were the type of questions. Your intelligence is something you can't change very much. So they were agreeing or strongly agreeing or disagreeing and strongly disagreeing. How about you can learn new things but you can't really change your basic intelligence? Or how about no matter who you are, you can change your intelligence a lot? Now, you'll find some of these mindset scans, they call them, for free. You can Google them and find them, but you can also go to our haiku course on mindsets and you can find these. We're also excited to say that some of our programs, Read 180 Universal, which is the newest program that Read 180 has put out, includes a mindset scan right in the work. Some other online computerized programs are starting to include this research with a mindset scan. But if you're interested in giving it to your students, and we have had teachers in our district do that, they've been able to find what students believe about themselves in this area of intelligence. So what they found in this study is that students who had a fixed mindset as they were moving through 7th grade math, term after term after term, their achievement was actually going down as they came across more difficult material. Those that had a growth mindset, that believed if they kept working at it, that they asked for help when they needed it, they, conversely, term after term after term, they had growth. So these ideas of a growth mindset, self-efficacy, which is advocating for yourself, self-management that has to do with those calming strategies we talked about, and social awareness, being able to ask for help and work with others. These were called mesh skills. Mindset, essential skills, and habits. And these are key competencies that can be taught in a school setting to help students succeed. And certainly this is what our businesses are looking for. And we need to, as educators, really think about how intentional we are about helping our students, all students, develop these mesh skills. You'll find some of these really kind of embedded in many, many, many of our standards about working with others, collaborating, working through problems, problem solving. The idea is if you help students through effort, hard work, scaffolding as needed, if they think that they can catch the bus, they will run for it. It's like that idea of the zone of proximal development. And we want to help our students get there to think that they can actually change the trajectory of their academic achievement and ultimately of their lives as they change the way that they think about their intelligence and their brain. There is a collaborative alliance of social emotional learning, which is a national organization that states the following. As states begin to implement the Common Core state standards, there's an opportunity to leverage social and emotional learning to facilitate the higher order instruction and engagement required by college and career readiness standards. They need those mesh skills in order to be able to do those top of the Bloom's taxonomy type projects. Castle goes on to say, with an emphasis on self-control, goal setting, and collaboration, social and emotional learning can develop the capacity of students for this work. So this isn't fluff. This is the basic stuff that we need to really work with our students around. Just think about the 8 mathematical practices, which were some of our first exposure to the new standards before we were fully implementing. Look at the words that are within the 8 mathematical practices. Students are required to persevere in problem solving, model, estimate, use tools, solve problems, conjecture and critique, use repetition and patterns, contextualize the math so that they understand how it's applied in the world. So they must learn to persevere in meeting these new standards. They must manage and regulate their emotions, tactics, and their attention. Study number 2 is an example of how we, as educators, can influence mindsets. So a group of students were given a nonverbal IQ test. Puzzles. As a matter of fact, some of your students on IEPs, when they were given their first battery of psychological educational testing for looking at them for special education, they took a nonverbal IQ test. Perhaps there's a verbal and a nonverbal, but in the nonverbal you're looking at how are they processing without language. So these students were given a very simple task to start. As a matter of fact, they were given several puzzles at this level that were quite easy for students. And really, as you can see, they're just trying to fit the puzzle piece in that finishes the pattern there. So they were given this test, and one group was set aside specifically as they were doing these tasks, these easy puzzle tasks, with intelligence praise. Things like, wow, that's a really good score. You must be smart at this. And the other group, same puzzles, easy for them. They were given effort praise as they moved along on these easy challenges. Things like, wow, that's a really good score. You must have tried really hard. What they found was that the intelligence praise was much lower as the puzzles began to increase in difficulty. So they gave up much earlier if they were intelligence praised. If they were praised for their effort, they actually persisted for a longer amount of time and actually had more success after failure as they kept persevering. So this idea of learning and growing and pushing yourself through failure with a growth mindset is really worth exploring. In the beginning, the effort praised students actually didn't have as many puzzles that they solved before they experienced a difficult puzzle that was considered failure for them. The intelligence praised group actually had a little bit of a higher amount of puzzles that they were able to solve, but they were getting intelligence praise. As the failure and the trials continued, the You Are Smart group continued to plummet in the total number of problems that they solved, where the You Tried Hard group actually increased and ended up in a position much better than the Intelligent Praised group. One of the side effects of the Intelligence Praised group, when asked to report out how they did on this puzzle task, is they lied. Students who misrepresented their scores at a far higher level if they were intelligence praised, because they didn't want to look like they weren't smart after they'd been told that they were. Much lower rate of lying about how they did for the effort praised group. So let's actually talk a little bit about the "you are so smart." How many of you have said that to your students? I know I have. We think that's an encouraging thing to say to students. This research begins to challenge us in that area. What does smart mean? And it doesn't mean that we would never tell a student that they have demonstrated intelligence. It just means, how are we messaging that? And what does it mean to be smart? Does it just mean I got it right the first time, quick, easy, fast? That's what students will internalize if we don't help them see that that does not always mean smart, just because I got it done quickly. As a matter of fact, if somebody does something that we put in front of them as teachers and it was so quick and so fast and so easy for them, we actually ought to be maybe apologizing to them and saying, I didn't give you a challenge. I didn't help you grow your dendrites, grow your brain a little bit more. Let me see if I can do better than that. So how do I know whether I'm cultivating a growth mindset in others? I think the first place to start is with language. There's some great work and studying being done around the impact of intelligence feedback and praise, just like we were talking about. When we say, "You're the best," it's possible that our students are hearing, if I take risks and make mistakes, I won't be the best. My teacher won't think I'm the best anymore. My parents, my friends, they won't think I'm the best. I better not take any more risks. Similarly, if we say things like, "Ooh, you're a rock star," "You're awesome," we've actually reduced our language to this kind of feedback that might have our students saying, "Oh, my teacher won't think I'm amazing or a rock star if I don't get the next thing correct or answer right. I better not say anything anymore for fear of not being that rock star or awesome any longer." Praise and feedback, actually, we want that to be what encourages the behaviors that we want to see. So on Mindset Works, as well as in our haiku course under resources, you'll see a nice little handy sheet for how to use growth mindset feedback and help our students actually begin to internalize these kinds of messagings. How about this one? "Oh, I really appreciate that you took on that challenge." Or, "I really appreciated that you asked questions and you asked for help when you didn't understand something." Or, "You really handled that mistake well and you learned from it." Praise them for their grit and their perseverance, for their effort in not giving up and their determination to get the right answer, and their sticking to it. So pause for a moment and think about a fixed mindset that you might have had that has held you back in some area, whether that's in recent times or in your own school experience. Could have been in relationships, in the performing arts, career growth, exercise, sports, fine arts, academics. Jot down on a paper maybe an area that you've been held back by a fixed mindset. You don't try something for fear of making a mistake. Sometimes it's good for us to put ourselves on the learning curve and see what that feels like to be in that position again in our lives. I did it with a ceramics class. As a matter of fact, if you ask me, I was the worst one in the class. I wrestled with this. I was struggling with feeling like I have a hard time visualizing what I want to make with ceramics. But I didn't give up, and I actually ended up proud of what I did produce. It wasn't the top by any means, but I learned something and I persevered and I pushed through, aware all the time that I wanted to give up. I wanted to not be the one that, had the crumbling piece of ceramics. So it was good to put myself on the learning curve. But you can think about something that maybe has held you back in this area as well. So computer-based praise research is actually something that's been on the scene now for a little while, and you start to find some messaging in some computerized programs, some of which we have in the Murrieta School District. But they did a very interesting thing with computer-based praise research when they were looking at this and the way that it affects and impacts student achievement and the type of messaging that we do. And so group one received problems like you see in front of you in mathematics, and here's what they were told in their messaging. Some of these problems are hard. Do your best. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Set your goals high and don't stop until you get there. Wasn't that encouraging? Very encouraging feedback. I've probably said some of those same things to students. The second group received growth mindset messaging, and it was more like this. Remember, the more you practice, the smarter you become. When you learn a new kind of math problem, you grow your math brain. The harder you try, the better you get. Do you see it? Do you see the differences there? It's actually linking the smart part to the practice, to the effort, and to the growth that can happen in your brain. It's subtle, but it's there. What happened? Well, the control group, they didn't get either kind of messaging. They performed the number of correct answers in a post-treatment with the orange bar there between 110 and 115. General encouragement, those kinds of messages that we give to students all the time to encourage them to keep going, they did worse than the control group. The growth mindset, students who received that kind of feedback, they actually did the best of all. So the lesson here might be, if you're not sure, say nothing. So what was the difference? Some of these problems are hard. Do your best. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Set your goals high and don't stop. That was the messaging. Do your best, try, don't stop. Look at the growth mindset messaging. Practice, smarter, new, grow your math brain. Harder you try, better. See it? Bottom line, encouraging statements don't help much. Growth opportunities do. We want to bring hope back into the equation, and we want to be intentional about it. And that's what the idea and the lessons and the plans that you can get from our haiku course, from reading mindsets in the classroom, from teaching students about the brain can do for students. Let's take a look at another study that they did in 2007. Dr. Dweck was also on this. And what they did is they had a control group and an experimental group. The control group got study skills training, so did the experimental group. The control group got basic brain facts about the brain, so did the experimental group. What they added for the experimental group was all of the work around the malleability of intelligence. The idea that you can grow your intelligence, that the research shows that the brain is like a muscle and it can be developed, and that you have some control over developing it and learning. So they looked at the math grades, again looking at math and adolescence, 7th grade. They found that the control group, their change in math grades over the term, pre-class and post-class, actually went down. They found that the growth mindset and the growth messaging and the impact of teaching about the malleability of the brain, that the post-class improvement for 7th graders in math actually increased simply by adding the idea that they can change their brain. So we're prepping our students for perseverance. What are some strategies for teaching students how to persevere? Here's a simple one. Instead of correct or incorrect, right or wrong, how about got it and not yet? Dr. Carol Dweck has a very powerful, very short little video about the power of the word yet. That's available to you on the Mindset Haiku course to show your students. Many students have seen it. Move around our district enough and you'll hear some students saying, I haven't gotten it yet. Or another student will say, I don't know how to do this. And his buddy will say, yet. So we want to teach that perseverance is fluid and changing. Well, there are 4 things that you can teach to prepare students to persevere. We talked about it, but how do we do that? Number 1, your brain, your habits, your skills are all malleable. You can teach what the purpose of a test is. Have you had students that say they think the test proves whether they're smart or not? Let's bust that myth. How about teaching them to learn from their mistakes? And finally, number 4, that they need strategies, that they can be resourceful. Some of our most resourceful students are the ones that we might not even expect, and they have the biggest growth mindsets. Here's a little picture to remind you about learning about the brain, and there are resources again in all of those resources I've mentioned. That when students learn that the brain gets stronger, literally that it changes with practice, it affects their motivation and ultimately their achievement. So learning about the brain, highly effective. There's ways to do that. A critical intervention about teaching students that you can grow your intelligence, you'll find ideas in mindsets in the classroom, but you can do things like build scientific models, pipe cleaner neurons, animations of neural networks and neuroplasticity, like the one that you can go get on the California Department of Ed. Art, drawing on a brain graphic when acquiring new knowledge or practice. What about a thinking map in the shape of a brain? And when they learn something new, they add dendrites, they add brain cells and show that they're growing their dendrites. Lots of ideas, sponges to show that when you add something to that knowledge, you actually grow your brain. Lots of ideas that you can help your students see this. Here's a poster. I've seen this around some of our classrooms in Murrieta. It's also available to download from the Mindset Haiku course. But you start with setting a goal. That's where we started, showed some of the things we have for goal setting in our district. When you set a goal, you become motivated. You begin to explore a new concept or skill. A new neuron is formed through a process called neurogenesis. You see, hear, think, and talk about the new concept. You make connections to things you already know. The neuron acts on fires and chemical signals are sent to the dendrites of other neurons. We can actually see this in the brain. Doesn't that sound a lot like activating prior knowledge and why we should do that? As your brain is getting stronger, you practice over and over and you pay attention to your mistakes. You think deeply about this new concept. You focus on the parts that are hard for you and you don't take any shortcuts. Dendrites grow like branches out of the neurons and reach out for other neurons. That's where the practice comes in. That's where you're dialoguing. Think about your standards where they have to speak together, talk together, have collaborative projects. And then as you get stronger still, you test yourself on the new concept and you apply your new knowledge to unique situations. Sounds like some rigor and relevance to me. You push yourself to see how much you can learn and explain the concept to other people. Present it. The dendrites continue to grow when you do this. More branches, and the signals between them fire more quickly to other dendrites. So in the end, you're very strong and you find that some parts that once seemed hard are a little easier now. But you do continue to push yourself on to the next challenge and learn from your mistakes. With more practice, your dendrites continue to grow. The network of neurons becomes more efficient and powerful, making the brain denser and smarter than it was before. I'm sure you can see how you can teach this to your students. How about talking about the test? Please tell students that a test is really just about showing what you know. There's actually some test-taking tips and reminders about how to talk about testing. Do you stress your students out when you talk about testing? Do you make them think that this is a make it or break it test for their life, for their college, for their career? Actually, the way that you talk to them about the test, while still helping them see that it's important, might just motivate them and challenge them. So let's talk about some test-taking tips. Why do we take the test? We take the test to show how much you're learning, to show how much more growth you can make, to show if you know the material that's on the test. That's why we take a test. The test does not show how smart you are. It does not show your potential. And it does not show if you will ever know the material on the test. It's just a snapshot in time. A little worried that if you say that to students that they might not give their best effort? I can guarantee if you teach them that it's just to show what they know and that they need to give their best effort to show what they know, they'll rise to that challenge. The message: relax, use your best effort, work hard, use your strategies, and dig in. This is a great chance to dig in and find out what you know. Then use the information when you get the results back to grow. There's a key concept. How about mistakes and learning? Some wonderful research being done about the kinds of mistakes that help us grow and learn. Might not be this kind. Are you sure this is how you spell the word school? This was a mistake, all right, but it might have been the one that was in the careless mistake category. Daniel Coyle is referenced there with a link there to how to make better mistakes. He goes through to talk about, and there's a wonderful YouTube video also about what you learn from mistakes and making mistakes. You'll find that in our haiku course as well. And that talks about the kinds of mistakes that we pay attention to that grow our learning versus the careless mistakes. How do mistakes help learning? Paying attention to why and how we made the mistake and then finding a new strategy. That is what makes a mistake good. Think about math talks. Think about science experiments. Think about inquiry. The why and the how we get there. Think about what's working and not working in your classroom. The why and how actually helps us learn, and the brain shows it. We grow our dendrites. So here's some ideas that teachers have used. Boo-boo parties. A boo-boo party obviously might be for younger students, but I am so glad I made a mistake because we actually begin to reinforce that when we make a mistake, we learn from it. Pits and cherries, that's the idea of highs and lows around our day and what we've learned. Failure bows. Students have used this, teachers have used this for students with a closure type activity. Today I struggled or I had a failure, but this is what I learned. Or how about this one, real positive language here. I had a learning today, and get a chance to talk about what that was, or write about it, or put it on the back of a test, or as an exit ticket. How about being resourceful and using strategies? Teach students that it's the strategies and being resourceful that moves us to the next level, and it actually shows in our brain. How about this? Look on the left. What works for you? Opening up the challenge math practice on the computer and just staring at it? Or look on the right. Open the challenge math practice and lay out your notes next to the computer, the mouse. Does it help just to tell a student, now stare at it harder? Or for the student to have his own thinking that if I just stare at it harder, I'll get there? How about the strategy of looking for similarities between the class practice and the computer practice? What you might find on the left is the student's going to close that window and open the email. Have you done that? A little avoidance work there. How about trying a few out and seeing what happens? How about rummaging through your backpack and getting a snack? Again, avoiding. How about looking at what the guy next to you is doing and ask a clarifying question? Look at the left there again. Reopen the window and start over. Click through it quickly just to get it done. Don't you have students that just hand you work and you know it was just I'm just going to get it checked off. I know I got it all wrong or I didn't learn anything from it. I think we have to teach those strategies and resourcefulness. Like try a few more and see if it goes any better. And then of course always asking for help when we need it. Here's a brain acronym. Break it down, repeat it, action, information search, and never give up. I've seen these posters around classrooms in our district. You can print one too and put one up in your district, in your classroom as well. Ways to say I don't know. Let's be intentional about this. Let's have this on the wall. Let's have this in student notebooks. Let's teach students to say it. Instead of I don't know, don't accept that in your classroom. How about May I have more information, please? May I have some time to think? Would you please repeat the question? Where could I find more information about that? Or may I ask a friend for help? Let's move beyond the I don't know. Let's not accept that. You'll also find at Mindset Works and in our haiku class, you'll find effort rubrics, effective effort rubrics. This rubric is written around taking on a challenge, learning from mistakes, accepting feedback and criticism, practice and applying strategies, perseverance, asking questions, taking risks. You'll see that the rubric goes from a fixed to a mixed to a growth mindset. Effective effort rubric in practice might look like this. Before taking on a new learning goal, students might rate themselves. How about after a summative test? They might rate themselves again. How about just rating themselves at looking at one or two strands at a time for a whole week, seeing if they move from a fixed to a mixed to a growth mindset? How about asking them to reflect about how they typically react, or discuss concrete examples of what a growth-minded reaction would look like? How about having students sit down with the rubric and highlight the behaviors they had leading up to the test? Or how about on the back, ask them to write to you about what they would do differently? Having metacognitive reflections and preflections could be a very successful strategy to work with your students. And a reminder, one of your California standards for the teaching profession, Standard 5, is all about assessing students. Well, one of them talks about helping students to self-assess and self-reflect as a powerful learning tool. What was your approach? What strategy did you use would be a reflection. But a preflection, what could be your approach? What strategies come to mind that might help you succeed? Do we spend enough time asking our students to preflect and think about what will help them be successful? What are some possible places you might have gone wrong? Or preflect before beginning, explain what might go wrong if you're not careful. Reflect. When did you put in the most effort? Explain why and what you did. Preflect. What will be the toughest thing to do and why? And then finally, what was the hardest part? And then what are you most prepared for? So again, to get a little clarity on this idea of growth mindset, it is not just encouraging one another. It is not just seeing effort as good. It is not just giving yourself a challenge. It's not persevering and never giving up. And it's not learning from mistakes. But what is it? It's understanding that we can develop our abilities through some of those other areas of learning from our mistakes and persevering. But it is about developing our abilities. It starts with the belief, moves to behavior, and impacts the outcomes. So you might want to jot down, and you'll have a chance to reflect in your journal in just a few minutes about what opportunities you might have to share mindset, to put mindset in action with your students, at your school, or with your family. Here's a place to get some more information once again. You can get a newsletter sent to your email on Mindset Works, and you can keep up with Emily Deal at mindsetworks.com. You will find the archived symposium that I referenced with the little video clip to show the brain to students on the California Department of Education Special Education Common Core resources. Hopefully that archive will stay up for a long time because it's powerful. And that's where you can also go on Mindset Works to hear the whole talk from Emily Deal. So to conclude, what we'd like you to do is take some time now to reflect on this concept of mindset. After you take some time to explore the links to the various mindset resources that we have shared and provided to the right of this tutorial, respond to the Mindset Reflection Journal by sharing something you have learned and can apply in your classroom with your students. painting for it. I'm here. I'm there. Now I'm afraid to do anything else. I got to that. Nothing. I have two open now. I was trying to see if I could get it to come happen up there. Yeah.
Last time. Let's see.
I stumbled on it before. I can't find it. What I did before. I think that's where I got it. I think I clicked that before and then it said finishing the video. But that's in video capture. How about egg yolk? I think I clicked that before, but I was afraid to do it this time.
That's it. just don't understand because it's never done that before. Yeah, it's recording something. It's just,
I was clicking all over the place before, but obviously I got
yeah.
no audio on the one I did. But I don't, all of a sudden, whatever I clicked, it did finish the video. Try exit.
I'm just afraid after all that work to do that. Is that what you did
I
before?
probably did that because I was trying to figure anything out, and then all of a sudden, I did not click anything across the top. I didn't do any save as. I just was trying to find the button to click out of it. Why would I try to finish the video? Because you're used to turning it off over here and
Yeah,
it pops up.
yeah. That's what I don't understand where it is.
Okay, so here's one thing that I hope that wasn't me, but when I got ready to start, it didn't progress from here
Mm-hmm.
until I took the mouse over and clicked on it, and then it progressed the rest of the way.
That shouldn't matter.
But that happened before too, and I got it. I didn't touch anything on that. I was down there on the little screen that opens everything up. It wouldn't let me
Right.
do it.
Yeah, that wouldn't
I was
matter.
trying to flip things, and I thought it was when I found that button that I did it. But
Which button?
I thought it was when I hit that button that all of a sudden it did finish. It's not doing it now. See, I've opened it twice now just to snag it out.
Right. The trouble is, this one keeps showing the old one.
Oh, at 3:33, there it is, right there. Did you see it?
Which one?
It is right there because it started at 3:33.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
but it says 1 second. Oh, that was our test.
Yeah, that's our test. That's
It
the one
hasn't
we.
finished yet. It's not there because it hasn't done the finish the video yet.
usually is right down in here. There's a little start button.
That's how do we get off of this screen? Like, is there a way to minimize this screen?
Yeah, well, that's usually what happens. Usually,
So, oh, do we have to do it under here?
no, it's just
I didn't do that. I was just on this side.
can't figure out what the heck's going on.